The Hidden Life of the Prophet Muhammad. A novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This book continues the story of the Arab sugar daddy and the beautiful Indian girl, and the story of the Indian child bride and the old Arab husband, and the story of the Indian Miss World and the rage of Muslims of the world, and the story of Christina and the complete Jew, and also the story of the tears of God. They have been written in English and translated into Arabic by the author Dr. Ahmed. This story resonates with genuine love, strong resilience, and steadfast courage. I invite you to accompany me as I continue narrating the story of the rare, fabulous beauty of the Indian daughter, Ifat Khan, and her extremely beautiful mother, Rehana Khan. Before we dive in the tapestry of the story, I would like to remind the reader this novel is narrated in 6 books. Book 1, The Arab Sugar Daddy and the Beautiful Indian Girl. Book 2, The Indian Child Bride and the Old Arab Husband. Book 3, The Indian Miss World and the Rage of Muslims of the World. Book 4, Christina and the Complete Jew. Book 5, The Tears of God, Jews, Blacks, and Muslim Women. And Book 6, The Hidden Life of the Prophet Muhammad. This is an intriguing epic story which exhibits resilience, love, and sacrifice. Book 6. Exposing the unspoken life story of the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer, who may quote brief passages from a review for printing in a public newspaper, general magazine, school journal, or university article. All characters in this novel are fictional, and any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is merely coincidental. Chapter 17. The Paradigm Shift in Europe. The many abuses of the Church led to huge social upheavals resulting in 5 revolts consecutively. 5 revolutions eventually changed the West from a Judeo-Christian society into a secular society. The 5 revolutions are 1. The Scientific Revolution, Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, and Newton. 2. The Cultural Revolution that came to be known as the Italian Renaissance, Michelangelo, Raphael, Dante, and Ronaldo da Vinci. 3. The Religious Revolution through the Reformation, Martin Luther, Zwingli, John Calvin, Puritans, etc. 4. The Philosophical Revolution, Descartes, John Locke, David Hume, and Immanuel Kant. 5. The Political Revolution, French Revolution, Russian Revolution, and American Revolution. After those revolutions, many Western thinkers quit evaluating things through God. They started using human reasoning to assess the truth. Beginning with the Cultural Revolution, the Italian Renaissance was caused by the migration of the Greek scholars and texts to Italy after the fall of Constantinople at the hands of the Ottoman Turks. Nonetheless, the Muslim Turks' invasion of Constantinople was a blessing in disguise for the West. Firstly, they cut the route between Europe and India, leading to the discovery of the New World by Christopher Columbus in 1492 AD. Secondly, their occupation of Constantinople caused many Greek scholars to run to Italy and bring with them Greek manuscripts of the Bible and Greek philosophy and arts. Before that time, there was only Jerome's Latin Bible. In the 4th century, Jerome translated the Bible from Greek into Latin, and that became the standard text for over 1,000 years. The Renaissance came as a result of the migration of Greek texts and philosophies to Italy. Thirdly, the Renaissance led to the Reformation. Fourth, the Church's princes and knights were busy fighting the Turks' advance into Europe, and that facilitated the spread of the Reformation teachings. The Church would not risk losing its territories to the Muslim Turks, and hence did not take Martin Luther seriously until it halted the Turkish advance and secured Europe. When the advance of the Turks was halted, Luther had become too big to contain or neutralize. The King of Germany wanted to kill Luther after he refused to recant. One of the German princes who supported Luther said in response, "We protest," and hence the followers of the Reformation were called Protestants. Renaissance was the rebirth of man and the arts. Catholicism had detached man from reality. The Renaissance strove to recover the dignity of man without Christ. Dante put the Pope in the hottest part of hell. Erasmus also challenged the Church of Rome, and said the Pope and the priests were bad people. Universities and schools began to open their doors to everyone. The men began to learn for the sake of learning. This was also the point in time that Marco Polo visited the East and met Genghis Khan. He discovered remarkable things done by the Mongols. At the same time, Magellan crossed the Pacific Ocean and completed the first circumnavigation of the Earth. Renaissance went back to the arts of the ancient Greeks. The arts of the Greeks were real, and not just symbols as the medieval arts. The Renaissance was a revival without God. Out of it came autonomy, the belief that by my reason I can find truth without God. The Renaissance went back to the Greek philosophies and arts and reintroduced them to the West. For a long time, the Church of Rome discouraged the reading of the writings of Plato and Aristotle. St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas had already Christianized the works of Plato and Aristotle, and the Church incorporated them in its main dogmas. So it came to be that the Renaissance focused on the Greek arts rather than the Greek philosophies. It was the rebirth of men by the vehicle of reason and arts. Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci were great contributors to the Renaissance. Michelangelo did his works during the Renaissance. His works showed that men through reason could rip off the bondage of ignorance and superstition and discover one's true self. The scientific revolution began before the Italian Renaissance. In those days, whoever disagreed with the Church got burned at the stake. Plato believed that the universe has perfect forms. Medieval thinkers thought that the planets and stars were the perfect forms of Plato. In the 2nd century, Ptolemy proposed a theory of the universe that the Earth is the center of the universe, and all the planets and stars rotate around it. Copernicus rejected that theory and claimed the Sun is the center of the universe and not the Earth. Today astronomy rejects the Copernicus theory and proves that our Sun is just the center of the solar system. It is one star among 200 billion stars in our Milky Way. Our Milky Way is just one galaxy among billions of other galaxies. Therefore, our Sun is just one star among trillions of other stars. Copernicus also said man is not the center of the creation. His new theory was called the Copernicus Revolution, and it truly revolutionized Western thought at that time. Kepler mathematically proved the theory of Copernicus. Galileo created a telescope and saw what Copernicus and Kepler had postulated. He saw the moon but did not see it as a perfect form of Plato. He saw it as a rubble of rocks. He could see the ring of Saturn and all other planets. He practically brought about the notion that the Earth and other planets are orbiting the Sun by himself. The Inquisition brought Galileo to the carpet and forced him to recant his assertion. If the Earth moves around the Sun, then why do earthly objects not fall off? Isaac Newton proved that gravity exists and there are laws of nature. According to him, the universe is like a watch or machine that governs by laws. God made a watch and makes it run by itself, but he is outside of it. Therefore, after Newton made his scientific discovery, people believed that men didn't need God. The universe is a machine, and God is not within the system. Then, men took those natural laws and put them in the steam engine and electricity, and that led to the birth of the Industrial Revolution. The Earth was seen as a small planet among millions. The universe became this cause-effect machine. In the Christian worldview, though man has a physical body that is bound by the physical laws of nature, man can exist outside of this cause-effect machine because he is created as a spiritual being in the image of a spiritual God. Man is not just a physical body governed by the laws of nature, but also a spiritual and moral being governed by moral imperatives. All the above mentioned for scientists were Christians: Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, and Newton. They lived and died as believers in the God of the Bible. Modern science is not possible without a Christian worldview. All other cultural worldviews, Hindu, Buddhist, and Muslim, could not come up with a correct scientific worldview because of their erroneous religious worldviews, which confuses men with nature. Nature has been seen as part of man. Therefore, they remained behind due to their poor understanding of the world around them. The Protestant Reformation followed after the Italian Renaissance. Martin Luther went back and recaptured the true biblical ideas. Before his Reformation, he genuinely believed in purgatory. He feared death and subsequently his journey to purgatory. One day, his friend was struck by a bolt of lightning and died. Martin Luther, being scared out of his wits, invoked one of the saints. He vowed that he would become a monk if he survived the lightning. He survived and so became a monk. He became known for his many prayers, confessions, penances, and good works. Martin Luther believed the Church's doctrine that man is justified through his works and penances. Later on, the Church appointed Martin Luther to the position of professor. He had to teach the Bible to his students. He read the Bible and found what he was looking for in the letter of Paul to Romans 1 verses 16 to 17. He discovered that the righteousness of God is not something you have to earn. It is given to men by God as a free, unmerited gift through grace out of love. At that very moment, Martin Luther believed in the promise of God and was saved. He never intended to lead a reformation and cause a second schism in the Church. At that time, you could buy a bishopric office with money. It was called simony, which is based on the story of Simon the magician, who offered money to the disciples thinking that he could buy the Holy Spirit, Acts 8 verses 17 to 19. In those days, the greatest honor in the society was to be a bishop or priest. One could make a lot of money by being a bishop or priest. The Church taught that if one sinned, he was required to do work of penance or pay money. People could pay money to the Church to avoid going to purgatory. It was called indulgences. One could also pay money to get his dear ones out of purgatory, father, mother, son, daughter, etc. Martin Luther did not like the way the Church abused the lay people through the use of indulgences. He discovered that the Church had created many erroneous teachings which have no scriptural support. Accordingly, on October 31, 1517, Martin Luther took his 95 Theses and nailed them to the Church's door of Wittenberg. He challenged the Pope and the entire Catholic Church. At that time, the Muslim Turks were conducting raids all over. They had invaded and captured many countries in Europe. Their Mujahideen fighters reached up to the gate of Vienna. They began to pose an imminent threat to Rome. So fate dictated that whilst Martin Luther began his Reformation, the Church of Rome, its princes, and knights were busy dealing with the Turkish invasions. The Reformation did not want to create autonomy, but it did. In 1455 AD, Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press. It put Luther's ideas into print. Its efficiency guaranteed him a wide circulation. The Reformation had many advantages, but it had some disadvantages too. After the Reformation, there was no unified orthodoxy among Christians. There was no means of solving the dispute of heresy. There was not one single central authority. There was no protection against heresy and skepticism. Secular knowledge was not going to be addressed. A separation was beginning between the secular and the spiritual. Autonomy was canonized. An ally was provided at the national level. At the scientific revolution, autonomy was going to be proven. The Roman Catholic Church did not give up easily. The Church decided to fight against all those who took the cause of the Reformation, collectively accused as heretics. Therefore, the Reformation resulted in a bloodbath during the 30-year war between the followers of the Roman Catholic Church and the newly established Reformation churches. 1 out of every 5 Europeans was killed in that long war. The population of Germany was reduced from 30 million to 13 million. The bloody war ended with the signing of the Westphalia Peace Treaty in Germany on October 24, 1648. The treaty ended the war and granted religious tolerance. Ever since, everyone has been free to follow the church of their choosing. Christendom was shattered and many new churches came into existence. Religious tolerance implies that I know that you are wrong, but I have to tolerate you. Neither the Lord Jesus Christ nor his disciples ever practiced religious tolerance. They are openly and directly confronted and exposed to religious errors and religious hypocrisy wherever and whenever they come in contact with them. Unfortunately, religious tolerance is today an important social virtue. No one is allowed to preach the gospel of Christ in workplaces, schools, universities, malls, or any other social gatherings. Schools were forbidden to teach Christianity, and the Lord's Prayer was taken out. Religion became a private and personal matter. The 30-Year War, 1618 to 1648, had created a new enemy called secularism. Many factors contributed jointly to the birth and growth of this enemy. After the signing of the Westphalia Peace Treaty, some European intellectuals decided to have nothing to do with a religion that caused such a long-lasting war, and the resultant bloodbath. This new enemy would turn out to be the real enemy of God and the Church. It is called Enlightenment. It is the devil masquerading as an angel of light. It was the result of joint efforts of scientists, philosophers, and novelists. So it all began as the Renaissance of Greek arts. Even the Reformists indirectly contributed to its birth and growth. The Reformation created a vacuum of Central Orthodox authority. Anyone could come up with his interpretation of the Bible, and there was no unified central authority to decide if what he brought agreed with the traditionally accepted sound doctrines of the Church. This led directly to schisms within the Church now and then until the present day. To begin with, first of all let us look into the conflict between the Church and the scientists. During the 2nd century, the Church adopted the Ptolemy theory, which taught that the Earth was the center of the universe and all other planets rotate around it. It also accepted the Aristotelian geocentric view that the Earth is the center of the universe and all planets revolve around it. Notice that the Bible never teaches such a theory. The Bible doesn't teach that the Earth is the geographical center of the universe, but it teaches that the Earth is the thematic center of God's creation. Copernicus, Kepler, and Galileo refuted the Aristotelian and Ptolemy theories and taught that the Sun is the center of the universe and the Earth is just another small planet spinning around the Sun. All three scientists were condemned by the Roman Catholic Church. Galileo was forced by the Church to recant his words. Even Martin Luther and John Calvin condemned Galileo. Nonetheless, Galileo's theory did not die with him because he invented a telescope that practically proved what others had postulated. By discovering the laws of motion and universal gravitation, Isaac Newton removed the last doubt lingering around the validity of the heliocentric model of the cosmos, which was taught by Copernicus, Kepler, and Galileo. In essence, the Church lost and the scientists won. One important thing needs to be mentioned again: Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, and Isaac Newton were all Christians and believed in God until their deaths. None believed that they refuted the Bible. All of them believed in the inerrancy of the Bible. They had only refuted the Ptolemaic system, which has nothing to do with the Holy Bible. Secondly, let us look at the conflict between the philosophers and the Church: René Descartes, John Locke, David Hume, and Immanuel Kant. Many more philosophers came up with some philosophical theories that conflicted with the Church, but these four were the crux of the matter. It said that Western philosophy was like blind men in a dark alley, looking for a black cat at midnight. The black cat is whatever they come up with for a unifying worldview. A worldview that would give answers to the existence of God, universe, man, dignity of man, evils, ethics, morality, aesthetics, system of government, theory of knowledge, ontology, etc. They believed that they could do that without God and the Bible. Through Immanuel Kant, Western philosophy embodied the blind men in dark alleys, looking for black cats at midnight which might have been there, but no one could prove for or against. With Nietzsche, Western philosophy became blind men in dark alleys, looking for black cats at midnight which wasn't there. He said there was nothing there. There was nothing called truth. The word he used for nothing is nil, from which he came up with his nihilism. With Jean-Paul Sartre, Western philosophy was blind men in a dark alley, looking for black cats at midnight, which was not there, but I have to invent my black cat. This is called existentialism. René Descartes was a Jesuit priest who put his Bible aside and tried to come up with a maxim that would be the foundation of science and also would provide solid proof for his existence and the existence of God. He was considered the father of modern philosophy and also the father of modernity. He was famous for his cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. He wanted to prove his existence without the aid of God. He doubted the existence of everything, including his doubting mind. However, he concluded that he could doubt everything except his thinking mind. Therefore he concluded that, I think, therefore I am, or I exist. He believed that he proved his existence. He also believed that in his mind he found some innate ideas implanted by God. One of those ideas was his belief in the existence of God. While he was trapped inside his mind, he discovered there were other innate ideas that were part of his mind. One of these ideas is his belief in God. Since he exists and God exists, then God is the source of everything. He said Newton taught him that there was no effect greater than its cause. A Christian doesn't need to take all this trouble to prove his existence and the existence of God. The Bible is the source of his knowledge. Since the Bible says God created everything and created man in his image and likeness, that is sufficient ground for explaining his existence. Moreover, the Christian knows that he is not only body, but he is spirit and soul too, because he is created in the image of spiritual, intellectual, and moral God. The problem of the Jesuit priest René Descartes started when he put his Bible aside and tried to use his mind to prove his existence and the existence of God. The first philosopher to respond to Descartes and refute his cogito was John Locke. John Locke said in response, "You have to say, I think, therefore I am, I think." He argued that Descartes was still inside the box of nature, and he couldn't stand out from it through his thinking, and arrived at a conclusion to prove his existence. He still needs his body to prove his existence. Therefore, Locke concluded that there is no knowledge possible without the physical world or the five senses to authenticate it. Mind alone can't prove anything. The response of Locke started the long-lasting conflict between the rationalists and the empiricists, the school of rationalism versus the school of empiricism. The former school teaches that the source of knowledge is the mind, whereas the latter school postulates that the true source of knowledge is the five senses or sense experience, rational knowledge versus empirical knowledge. David Hume refuted the theories of both schools and created fundamental problems for the foundation of science and philosophy, reason, and sense experience. According to him, through those two human faculties, no one could prove anything. The human mind is inside nature, and whatever it perceives comes through its sensations. No one could stand out of his mind and see the physical world without his five senses. He argued that Descartes was using Christian assumptions and not his reason. He also refuted the postulations of scientists such as Newton, Galileo, Copernicus, etc. He refuted the rationalism of Descartes, the empiricism of John Locke, and the foundation of science. His position came to be known as the wrecking ball because it destroyed every avenue of human knowledge. His philosophy, which was also known as skepticism, posed a real threat to everything, religion, philosophy, and science. It was Immanuel Kant who responded to the challenge of David Hume and proved that both schools, rationalism, and empiricism possessed a half-truth. He argued that knowledge begins with experience, 5 senses, but is perfected by the human mind because it is endowed by some categories of understanding. Descartes called them innate, or inborn ideas. Every human being possesses those categories of understanding. Without them, human knowledge, rational or empirical, is impossible. Immanuel Kant argued that the human mind was furnished by some prior knowledge. The human mind has a prior or previously organized construct. This prior knowledge was not part of his experience, but it was already there in his mind. For example, one of those categories of understanding is the law of causality, cause and effect. The human mind begins its knowledge or understanding with those laws and brings them, or applies them into nature. However, those categories were just pure abstract forms. From this, he named his philosophical book, Critique of Pure Reason. Those categories were like goggles that the human mind uses to perceive nature. Without them, human knowledge was impossible. Moreover, without nature, those categories don't work. They could work only with the help of the 5 senses. Therefore, human knowledge begins with the senses and is perfected within the mind. Every human being sees with the same organized construct. Therefore, everything man perceives has to be objective, universal, repeatable, and confined to space and time. The human mind cannot know otherwise. Kant rejected the possibility of any spiritual and psychological knowledge or any private knowledge. He believed that he had refuted all the proofs of the existence of God. He argued that man cannot prove the existence of God, nor could he refute the existence of God. The man could see reality, but as his mind perceives it. Therefore, man can know reality with certainty, but he cannot operate absolutely. The man could see the phenomena, the physical object as it appears to him, but he could not see the noumena, the object in itself. He could see the physical objects as they appear to him, but he could not see them as they are, and he could not know whence they came from. Kantian philosophy created an even more fundamental problem than that of Hume's skepticism. He came up with agnosticism, an intellectual doctrine, or attitude affirming the uncertainty of all claims to ultimate knowledge. His philosophy produced the Enlightenment. It was employed by Enlightenment thinkers such as Rousseau, Voltaire, Nietzsche, and the like, who categorically oppose any claim to spiritual or metaphysical knowledge. Kant said the story of the Bible is not possible for the human mind because it is an upper story, and the human mind cannot know anything beyond space and time. Therefore, Kant supposedly proved that human beings cannot know anything beyond space and time, and hence he allegedly refuted the proof of the existence of God. The human mind cannot prove the existence of God, nor can it disprove the existence of God. Kant ends the philosophical quest for the truth. According to him, man cannot know anything spiritual or metaphysical in corporeal beings such as God, angels, devils, life after death, etc. He rejected the innate ideas of Descartes because they don't belong to sense experience. He renamed them pure forms or categories of understanding. Therefore, Immanuel Kant gave the enemies of the Church and God their first weapon. With Kant began the road to darkness, which is called Enlightenment, modernism, humanism, existentialism, postmodernism, and so on. First of all, the Bible never tries to prove the existence of God. The first chapter and the first verse of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, postulated the existence of God, which is natural knowledge, or innate idea, implanted by God in the mind of every human being. In Romans chapter 1, verses 19, 21, the Bible says that every human being knows God. Even the devils believe in God and tremble, James chapter 2, verse 19. Every human being says that there is no God is a liar or a fool, Psalm 14, verse 1. No one is born an atheist. People go to school to learn atheism. Before Charles Darwin proposed his theory of evolution, that atheists had nothing to hold to except their blind faith in atheism. Funny, but if good does not exist, there would be no need for atheists. Evolution made atheism an intellectual possibility for alternative belief in God and His creation. Most of those who hold on to evolution use it as a cover-up for their moral perversion. Evolution is an unproven theory, but it is taught in schools as a fact. Evolution justifies racism, slavery, mass genocide, Nazism, Marxism, communism, New Age, New World. Some races are more evolved and favored than other races. This is a dangerous statement because the Jews are favored. The full title of the book by Charles Darwin is The Origin of Species, Utilizing Natural Selection, or Preservation of Favored Races in Struggle for Life. Some races are more favored by nature than other races. The less evolved and favored races need to be destroyed by the more favored to speed up the process of evolution. Darwin believed that the natives of the Americas and the blacks of Africa and Australia were mere animals or less evolved apes. Therefore, he wrote that the civilized races, the favored races, of men will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world. Charles Darwin, The Descent of Man, Chapter 3, and World Book of Encyclopedia 1952, page 336. Evolution destroys the faith of millions of Christian children who join public schools. 75% of all children raised in Christian homes who attend public schools will reject the Christian faith by their first year in college. The Dangers of Evolution by Kent Hovind. Rousseau was the first one to apply the agnosticism of Kant. He said Kant proved that there was nothing called divine knowledge. Therefore, we should not submit to kings because there was no divine right by which the kings ruled. The notion that kings have a divine right to rule is an antiquated and outdated Christian idea that we have shown to be untrue and cannot be proven to be true. The government should be by right consent. Rousseau returned to the Greeks and borrowed their model of democracy, the rule of the majority. The rulers should be appointed by the people and rule with the consent of their subjects. If the subjects don't want them, they can revolt and kick them out of the office and bring others to rule them. However, the Bible said, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established." The authorities that exist have been established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. Romans 13 verses 1-2. Therefore, Rousseau went against the Bible and reintroduced a secular model of government. He argued that there was no divine right by which these kings rule, the rulers should be appointed by reason. Based on his argument, many regicides took place in Europe. In 1688 England deposed their royals, and in 1793 France put their king and queen to death. Voltaire did not come up with innovative ideas but preached Rousseau. Rousseau's philosophy also led to the French Revolution, where the people revolted and took the king and cut his head off. They also sent the queen to the guillotine, took a prostitute from the streets and crowned her the goddess of reason. Many nobles, priests, and other laity were killed. More than 25,000 were accused as enemies of the revolution and beheaded by the public razor, the guillotine. That bloody period was known as the Reign of Terror. Napoleon took charge, and that led to a bloodbath too. Rousseau's philosophy also led to the Russian Revolution, which ended in the totalitarianism of Stalin, who murdered 20 million Russians. Later on, a tyrant would take charge in Germany, kill 6 million Jews, and lead Europe into a war that would kill 55 million people. It all started with Descartes, who rejected the teaching of the Bible and erected an idol called human reason, which entrapped Locke, Hume, and Kant. This ultimately led to a Christian cult that depended on human reason and disposed of anything that didn't correspond to human reason, such as the Holy Trinity, the divinity of Jesus, the two natures of Christ, deity and human, the inerrancy of the Bible, the original sin, the virgin birth, the miracles, the resurrection of Christ, heaven and hell, etc. It also produced a religion called deism, which taught that God is absent and prayer for the weak. Europe was going toward the secular, but America was still held to the sacred. Abraham Lincoln said the foundation of our ethics and the umbilical cord of ethics is the Bible. Harry Truman said our American Constitution is based on Matthew and Exodus, the Sermon on the Mountain, and the Ten Commandments. The Puritans who left Europe and came to America nurtured the sacred from the profane. While Europe went into bloodshed and chaos, America had three great awakenings or revivals. Enlightenment ideology plunged Europe into 2 world wars that led to 80 million deaths. Those were the so-called enlightened intellectuals who followed the moon-erected idol of the Enlightenment and upheld the idea that they had a right to kill everyone around them. Man for them was just an animal that you beat unto submission or just killed. There was no difference between killing a fly and a human being. The Bible says whoever sheds man's blood by man his blood must be shed because man is created in the image of God. Genesis chapter 9, verse 6. For them, man evolved from the apes. Man is a God-intoxicated ape, and the only way to free him from his superstitious idea of God is to force him to accept a new ideology devoid of God. Submit or you shall be killed. It is just the other side of the same coin. Allah is the only God and Muhammad is his messenger. If anyone refuses to submit to this belief is to be killed. They are 2 faces of the same coin, and their source is the same, Satan. Europe had sent 5 intellectual and ideological bombs to America. The first bomb was called deism. God created the world as a clock and left it to run by itself. It is the belief that reason and observation of the natural world are sufficient to determine the existence of a creator, accompanied by the rejection of revelation and authority as a source of religious knowledge. God could be known by human reason, and hence no need for the Bible. The last verse in the Bible of Thomas Jefferson, and they laid him in a tomb. He cut from his Bible everything supernatural. America was still largely spared the European Enlightenment. The second bomb was called Darwinism, evolutionism. Before the theory of evolution, few believed there was no God. After Darwinism, people believed that man could be an intellectual atheist. Darwinism could not be proved until today through the observation of fossils. Fossil recordings showed static species as in Genesis chapter 1. There was no place where men discovered evidence of evolution in nature. The third bomb was called higher criticism of the Bible. Lower criticism assumes the inerrancy of the Bible. The advocates of higher criticism applied Darwinian evolution in the Bible. They claimed that the Bible wasn't a supranational book that was revealed by God to men, but a compilation of many people's individual opinions of what they believed about God. Moreover, they did not believe the stories of the Bible were actual events that took place in history. The Bible recorded the evolving perceptions of people about a deity. It started as polytheism, God is the God of many gods, to henotheism, God is the chief God, and went to monotheism, God is one God, then the God of wrath in the Old Testament, the Jewish God Yahweh, Jehovah, and finally became the God of grace under Jesus Christ in the New Testament. According to them, the Torah of Moses was not written by one person, but it was compiled by many authors. One author used the name Jehovah, they called it the J document, a second author used the name Elohim, E document, and a third author of the priestly caste, P document, and a fourth author wrote Deuteronomy, D document. Similarly, Moses was just a name used later on to unify all those documents in one book written by one person. Higher criticism started in a seminary in Germany, spread all over Europe, and finally beached itself in the States. The advocates of this theory never hold the Bible to be the true inspired Word of God. Many Christian colleges and seminaries believe and teach this. After this, Christianity was divided into 3 groups: Catholics, Protestants, and liberals. The first 2 groups believed in the inerrancy of the Bible but differed in their interpretations of it. The third group doesn't believe the Bible to be an inerrant revelation of the Word of God. Christianity isn't seen as a blessing to Western culture, but as a religion that is holding society back. Christianity is no longer seen as progressive, but many people see it as a regressive threshold blocking the progress of man. Nietzsche believed that the greatest boom of Western culture would be the official recognition of the death of God. Then, he said, his stench would fill Europe. Nietzsche was known for his blasphemous statement, "God is dead." The last bomb was nihilism. It is the logical conclusion to the rationalism of Descartes. Someone called it the bastard child of rationalism. Rationalism produced empiricism, and the two schools of human reasoning led to agnosticism, and finally came out of the satanic trinity nihilism of Nietzsche. However, the story of Western philosophy would not end with nihilism. Hegel rejected the cold nihilism of Nietzsche, and came up with pantheism, where God is everything. According to him, God is the force, or the spirit, and nature is the skin that God put on. In Hegelianism, God is identified with nature. It is an intellectual resurrection of Hinduism which teaches everything is God. Nietzsche said there is no point in holding to those little God words such as God, spirit, angels, Satan, heaven, hell, salvation, etc. He said we should get rid of those outdated Judeo-Christian notions. Nietzsche produced Nazism and Hitler, and Hegel led to Karl Marx, who produced communalism, or communism, and Stalin. Nevertheless, America resisted the influence of Europe for a long time. It had never fought a religious war along the lines of the European 30-Year War. It had not fought any secular wars on its shores as Europe did during World War I and World War II. America rescued Europe twice from those two self-annihilating wars. The only civil war America fought on its soil was to free some of its citizens from the bondage of slavery. America waged a deadly war against its people when someone in the South said that the black man had no soul, could not be saved, and had to remain a slave to the white man. While Europe was wallowing in the mockery of atheism, America was sending Christian missions to the Third World. Today, when the Vatican and other European countries turn their collective backs to God and recognize the state of Palestine as a valid entity, America continues to support Israel. God bless Israel and bless America. Nonetheless, the enemy of God has not given up on getting America to abandon Israel. He also pushes with all his might for America to turn its back to God. On June 26, 2015, the devil succeeded in causing the American Supreme Court to legalize same-sex marriage. David Reagan writes, "Today our nation's Supreme Court decided that it is the supreme being. It spits on God's word and endorses the abominable, immoral concept that the definition of marriage can be expanded to include a union between two people of the same sex. The God of this universe is the one who created and defined marriage as a union between one man and one woman, and no one has the authority to change that definition." Matthew 19, verses 4-5. Further, God's word makes it crystal clear that homosexuality is an abomination in God's sight, and its practice is sufficient to preclude one from the kingdom of God. 1 Corinthians 6, verses 9-11. The first chapter of the book of Romans states that a society's acceptance of homosexuality is a sign that it is under the judgment of God and is begging for destruction. Romans 1, verses 18-27. Dr. David Reagan, Lamb and Lion Ministries, TX. Immanuel Kant brought an end to Western philosophy by arguing that human reason was not equipped to perceive anything beyond the physical world. He reduced man to an empirical sensory being whose mind could function only in space and time. He rejected all emotional, spiritual, and psychological human experiences and considered them just byproducts of a human physical brain. Hegel stressed that Kant was correct, but only half right. He said man has within him a sense of morality, heroic notions, and great mythological ideas. He said those are part of our spirits or souls. Hegel came during the Romantic period. The men reacted against the cold rationalism, deism, and nihilism of the philosophers and came up with Romanticism. Romanticism is defined as a reaction against the Age of Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and the scientific rationalization of nature. People express their revulsion through visual arts, music, and literature. This shows us that man cannot inherently remain coldly rational because he has emotions, passions, morals, and a sense of heroism in him. Hegel rejected the transcendental God of the Bible who created nature, but he believed that God is the spirit of nature itself. He said further that if you want to see his work in nature you have to study history. Through history God reveals himself. In every generation, man would conclude what is right, and that would be a thesis. The next generation would come with a different interpretation of what is right, and that would be antithesis. The third generation would compromise and reconcile both thesis and antithesis in what he called synthesis. The synthesis of the third generation would be a new thesis that would produce an antithesis of the next generation, and the cycle would go on. Hegel saw history evolving, and hence he applied Darwinism to history. According to him, man evolves mentally and spiritually. Karl Marx thought that this was the ultimate thesis of human history, and came up with communism. He saw himself as the final prophet of Western philosophy. He was like Prophet Muhammad, who claimed to be the final prophet of God, and everyone after him would be a false prophet. Anyone who rejects him is to be killed. Those who espoused the philosophy of Marxism acted like Muhammad and killed those who refused to submit to them, Stalin, Pol Pot, and Mao Zedong. Of God. Therefore, he said, we have found the Bible to be a myth. Hitler felt he was going to bring the ultimate utopia of history through his Nazism. Nietzsche reacted to the Hegelian notion of the spirit of nature. He felt that Hegel had resurrected the Christian idea of God. Therefore, he said, we have found the Bible to be a myth, and we have found philosophically no one could know the truth. We also know that the universe evolves and there is no God. Therefore, let us stop using Semitic words such as God, love, and mercy. We are within nature and our minds are controlled by natural laws just like animals. There is no right and wrong. If we have to find meaning in nature, we need to assert ourselves like animals. We have to practice the law of nature, might make right. The stronger lives on and evolves, and the weaker dies off. Man is the king of the beast. Then, he said, the greatest wickedness ever done to Western society is the Jews and Christians who are holding us back by their antiquated, outdated ideas of deity and right and wrong. He said Christians are exalting poverty and loving the poor. To make society better, let the poor die, and then we become a stronger society. Nature, according to him, never honors the weak, but it destroys the weak. If we follow the law of nature, our society will become great societies. He believed the greatest notion that did injustice to man the animal was the notion of mercy. We should let the weak and poor die. Nietzsche came up with what is known as eugenics. According to eugenics, some people have stronger and better genes than others. Then, he said, we need to practice eugenics in society. We need to get rid of the poor, the weak, and the physically disabled. Recently, the Princeton professor, Peter Singer, calls for the killing of disabled infants under Obamacare. Nietzsche proposed that the cultures which are more advanced need to move on and destroy the less advanced cultures. He believed the two cultures that we should get rid of are the Jews and blacks. Nietzsche was highly racial and highly genocidal toward the weak. Adolf Hitler gave the writings of Nietzsche to Benito Mussolini as a gift. Hitler put into practice what Nietzsche proposed. Many tyrants were influenced by the teachings of Nietzsche. Adolf Hitler, he gassed 6 million Jews and caused the death of 55 million people during World War II. Benito Mussolini caused the death of millions. Joseph Stalin killed 20 million Russians. Chairman Mao killed millions, and until today no one knows how many he murdered. Idi Amin killed over 1 million and ate human flesh. The communist Khmer Rouge regime, and the killing fields at Cambodia. Pol Pot. Through the killing fields, he put to death half of the population of Cambodia, and the list goes on. Nietzsche's nihilism was the end of the rationalism of Descartes. He got rid of Hegel's pantheism or mysticism. He taught the greatest virtue of man, the beast, is terror. Science was seen as good because it kept on progressing and producing testable results. Science was started on the Christian worldview. Man could stand out from nature, study it, and come up with results. It started by Bible-believing Christians such as Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, and Newton. None of them rejected the Bible or stopped believing in God after he made his discovery. Unfortunately, science was commandeered by the secular philosophers and thinkers of the Enlightenment. It was wedded with the Darwinian theory of evolution, which rejected the creation of God. Today, evolution is supported by the so-called Big Bang theory. Both theories rejected the creation of the universe by God. According to the Big Bang theory, the whole universe came out of nothing. What a silly idea to believe that one day out of the blue nothing exploded and created everything. Then, after billions of years, a huge cosmic dust created the galaxies, stars, and planets. The stars kept forming and dying, and their remains produced all the chemical elements that were needed to produce life. First, the elements produced molten rocks. Secondly, after billions of years, those molten rocks cooled down and produced chemical soup. Out of that chemical soup appeared the first life. That life found someone to marry, and both replicated themselves. They produced their kind with specific DNA. They continued to reproduce until new species evolved out of them and replicated their kind, and so on. From nothing to everything, from cosmic dust to rock, to soup, from soup to life, from one single life to millions, from millions to billions of varied species, to mammals, to apes, to human beings, to favored races, to super races, etc. From that nothing came trillions of stars. According to modern astronomy, for every individual human being on Earth, there are 11 trillion stars. Until today, evolution has not been proven. The fossils records showed the static species of Genesis chapters 1 and 2. No one can prove the evolution of mammals into apes, and of apes into human beings. Evolution instructs that men evolved out of rock and chemical soup. Despite this, evolution is taught in schools as a fact. When the evolution of the species was not sustainable, the theory was extended to the evolution of the species through equilibrium or jump. In other words, when evolution could not be found in recorded fossils, the theory was changed to one species jumping to another species. Mammals jump to apes, apes jump to human beings, and human beings will jump to supermen, according to the book of Nietzsche, the Superman. Evolution made secular philosophers and thinkers hijack science and uproot it from its Christian worldview foundation. Someone said evolution made secular men a proven intellectual atheist. Until today, no one knows with certainty what is the best form of government, democracy. 51% of voters decide what is right and who to rule. Fascism, fascia, is a Latin word which means a bundle, to use it to beat people into submission, as did Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, etc., or communism, removing the upper and lower classes and making all people equal and living in communion society. America adopted democracy because it came from a Christian worldview, while in Europe, fascism and communism were adopted by many countries. The family was seen as a behavioristic model where some people with external genitals and some with internal genitals, and the little children were beaten and kept under control. Then, the government became the parent and started taking the children and raising them. Parents have no absolute rights over their children, but the children belong to society. Many families had their kids taken away from them and given to others deemed more qualified to raise. For small reasons, or sometimes just for rumors of abuse, parents stand to lose their children. Parents, when aged, are no longer cared for by their offspring. They are removed from their homes and placed in geriatric facilities. It looks like the children are paying their parents back for neglecting them when they are small and sending them to daycare. Many people find children are coming between them and their comfort, and hence contraception products are flourishing. 40 million children are aborted every year in the USA. People preserve baby harp seals but abort human babies. People spend a lot of money raising pets and either intercepting the conception of babies or aborting babies. Modern arts, music, and literature are becoming meaningless without believing in the absolutes. Sartre said any point without referring to an absolute point is meaningless. After Nietzsche came Martin Heidegger. He was a German Nazi. Western philosophy started with blind people looking for black cats in dark alleys at midnight. Nietzsche asserts that the black cat isn't there and ventured to add that everyone needs to invent his own black cat. Henri Louis Bergson said there is a force moving through nature where the strong survive and the weak die off. We need to seize the force of nature and assert ourselves. Bergson convinced many thinkers that immediate experience and intuition are far more significant than rationalism and science for understanding reality. By the end of the 19th century, many Christian faiths in God and the Bible were seriously damaged. Many factors jointly caused the faith of Christians to be shaken: rationalism, agnosticism, Darwinism, liberalism, the advocates of higher criticism, deism, nihilism, etc. Those theories were in direct conflict with the biblical beliefs in God, creation, the Bible, morality, the concepts of right and wrong, etc. Many Christian denominations began to embrace external secular theories. The Christians who rejected them split from their denominations to go into hiding. Instead of standing their ground and asserting the teachings of the Bible, Christians separated themselves from society and let secular ideas take over. Everything was secularized. Many think that secularism means separating religion from the state. That is just half of the picture. Secularism is a system of political or social philosophy that rejects all forms of religious faith and worship. It is the view that public education and other matters of civil policy should be conducted without the introduction of a religious element. Many Christian colleges and universities began to fall for politically correct secular ideas. Martin Heidegger asserted that there is no truth in life, and that whatever man thinks is the truth that gives meaning to his life. Man has to assert his life by exercising his will, and his right to choose whatever he thinks will give meaning to him. Existentialism: no one knows the truth, or there is nothing called truth, just create your own truth and exist. Existence precedes essence. Man first exists as a pet gorilla, and then he develops appendages called intellect, will, emotions, and other cognitive skills. Those appendages are not divine, but man develops them to protect himself from other species. Man is no longer a being created in the image of God, but an ape evolved into a higher species. Nihilism was so cold that Enlightenment thinkers came up with existentialism. The latest production of Western philosophy is the works of the existential philosophers Kierkegaard, Heidegger, Jaspers, Marcel, Camus, Sartre, and his consort Simone de Beauvoir. In existentialism, you are like God and decide what you think is true to you. Satan said you shall be like the highest God. It is clear why existentialism is so attractive to the youth. It created the kids of the 60s. One existential thinker put a glass of water on his wife's head and tried to shoot it, but he killed his wife instead. One killed his lover because he abused him when he was a child. One existential writer drafted his entire book on butcher's papers. Existentialism led to drugs. In the 60s, the kids took drugs in the quest for philosophy. Through drugs, they hoped to come out of themselves and get in touch with nature. Freud took the mind from man. Postmodernism rejects the existence of reason, truth, nations, morality, etc. Freud felt the greatest human being ever to exist was Nietzsche. Before Freud, counselors would try to define issues such as ignorance, weakness, peer pressure, sin, and other emotive values. Freud stated that man has an ID. The ID is his desire for lust and desire for physical needs. Man has an ego and a superego. The superego tries to keep him in check. The superego is imposed on man by his society. There is always a conflict between the id, animalistic nature, and the superego, socially imposed standards. Man parades his ego to society, which is likened to an iceberg beneath which all the conflict resides. Therefore, he said, man doesn't have a mind. He is conscious and subconscious. Man, like the animal, is neither moral nor immoral, but an amoral being. Suppose someone sees a sexually attractive woman and develops a sexual desire for her, or sees food and desires to have it. His superego restrains him from fulfilling those needs. Those unfulfilled desires will never disappear, but will be suppressed and stored in his subconscious. All unfulfilled passions such as lust, anger, love, hate, and desire for food will go to the subconscious and wait for release. Man hides them, but sometimes they come to the surface through dreams, slip of the tongue, while under the influence of alcohol or drugs, etc. Freud holds that man has no mind and only his conscious and subconscious moves and determines his action. In essence, Freud divorced man from his mind, and man finally is reduced to an animal that develops appendages to protect himself from his perceived threats. Harvard University began as a Christian college to teach biblical theology and ethics. Buckling under the influences of the ungodly secularist ideas, it digressed to a secular institution. In those days, you would be expelled from Harvard University if you didn't hold to the inerrancy of the Bible, but today you might be kicked out of it for believing in the Bible. When Harvard University fell, Yale University was established to replace it and teach Christian theology. Then, Yale University was secularized, and it was replaced by Princeton University. When Princeton University became secular, Texas Theological Seminary was founded to teach biblical ethics and theology. Many theological seminars became empty. Students are no longer interested in studying theology. The youth are abandoning the churches. The Enlightenment of Descartes, Kant, Rousseau, and Voltaire led to Darwinism, no creation, but evolution causes us to be humans. It states that all species of organisms arise and develop through the natural selection of small, inherited variations that increase the individual's ability to compete, survive, and reproduce. Liberalism is a movement in modern Protestantism that emphasizes freedom from tradition and authority, the adjustment of religious beliefs to scientific conceptions, and the development of spiritual capacities. According to the advocates of that movement, the Bible is full of errors, and it is the production of efforts of people trying to know God. Humanism holds that there is no difference between man, dog, tree, or animal. All have equal rights to exist. All are the production of the first couple who came by mere chance out of nothing, Mother Nature and Father Time. Pantheism advocates that the universe is God. It is the doctrine that God is the transcendent reality of which the material universe and human beings are only manifestations. It involves a denial of God's personality and expresses a tendency to identify God and nature. Freudianism, man has no mind, soul, or spirit. Man's mind is just his social behavior, which is determined by his conscious and subconscious. Freud took from man his mind and reduced him to just a biological, social, and psychological animal. Man became the king of the beasts. By then, the church lost its authority, and the philosophers and scientists became the final authority. Whatever they said became the final word. Then came the Darwinian theory of evolution, Hegel thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, Nietzsche, God is dead and nihilism, Marx, communism, and Sartre, existentialism. The Enlightenment produced Robespierre, Napoleon, Hitler, Stalin, Fidel Castro, Mao, Pol Pot, and the list goes on. Western secularism and atheism reached their zenith in World War I, 20 million people killed, and in World War II, 55 million people killed. Western rejection of God and the Bible, and the adoption of man-made secular systems under the so-called Enlightenment and secularism brought such untold destruction and misery, making the 20th century the bloodiest century in all of human history. Nietzsche taught that God is dead, which obviates the need to talk about outdated Judeo-Christian notions of God, love, mercy, and grace. He believed that these concepts were the trademark of the weak. The weak races created them to protect themselves from the stronger and superior nations. According to him, the greatest virtue is terror. He calls for the practice of eugenics, that some people have better and stronger genes than others. Following the Darwinian theory of natural selection or survival of the fittest, Nietzsche taught that it is preferable to allow weaker races to die off. He said the stronger ones should go ahead and destroy the weaker races, the civilized nations should get rid of the uncivilized nations, and the savages have to die. He proposed that poor people should be forced to live in unhealthy environments so that nature could hasten their demise. Nietzsche was highly racial and believed that blacks and Jews should be disposed of. Hitler put into practice Nietzsche's teaching of eugenics and killed 6 million Jews. He intended to finish the Jewish race first, and then on to Africa to destroy the black race. When Hitler heard that his German athletes were defeated in the Olympics by a black American, he protested because his men were made to compete against an animal. Human beings are considered mere animals, bubbles of nothing in the sea of emptiness and cosmic dust. Man finds himself thrown into a sense of disorientation and confusion in the face of an apparently meaningless or absurd world. Man has to choose whatever he likes in this meaningless and absurd world. There are no standards or absolutes. There are no moral standards by which to distill right from wrong. A man decides what is right for him. What if someone thinks that what is right for him is to steal, or rape, or kill someone else? There are no standards to deter him. Existentialism produced the youth of the 60s, drugs, sex, alcohol, immorality, nakedness, nudeness, vulgar music and dance, violence, pornography, bestiality, murders, and many more anomalies. Today, it is conceivable that a kid can obtain a gun and proceed to shoot other kids in his school, and then take his own life. According to existential philosophy, the biggest question in life is whether or not to kill oneself. Since there are no standards, the answer to that question is left to everyone's choice. There is no meaning in life. The modern existential man becomes depressed, despaired, and suicidal. For him, God is dead, man is dead, family is dead, child is dead, society is dead, morality is dead. Science has taken the place of God. Everything without infinite reference is meaningless. Life is meaningless and absurd. Man is a mass of matter, he doesn't have a mind, he doesn't think, he has no will, he doesn't love, but is in essence a selfish animal. Man is a cosmic orphan. He becomes depressed, despaired, pornographic, violent, and aware of his sex drive only. The only impulse that moves man is his sexual drive. Masses of peoples come together in what are called countries and nations, and without moral absolutes to govern them, they treat each other as enemies and destroy each other, World War I and World War II being the result. Today, we witness the birth of a new philosophy in the late 20th century called postmodernism. Its vanguards are Jacques Derrida, Michel Foucault, Martin Heidegger, and Jean-François Lyotard. It is said that postmodernism is the Enlightenment turning against itself. It is an attack on the idol of Enlightenment, reason. They argue that the Enlightenment thinkers invented reason to create ideologies that enabled the white man, the male, and the West to subjugate and dominate the non-white people, the female, and the non-Western countries. Western postmodernist feminists feel their only enemy is the white male who invented reason and began to own them as chattels, wives, and prostitutes. Postmodernist philosophers rejected the validity of human reason, knowledge, truth, and progressive culture. For them, all cultures are relatively true. There is no culture better than other cultures. There is no difference between Western culture, Afghani culture, Arab culture, and Zulu culture. Whatever people do in their culture is true to them, and no one has the right to criticize them. If we follow such logic, then we cannot criticize the Islamic practices of female genital mutilation, child marriage, wife beating, polygamy, etc. We cannot condemn the followers of ISIS because all their practices, beheading, stoning, throwing gays from towering buildings, burning, caging, flogging, chopping hands, crucifying, invading, robbing, raping, and selling female captives, are prescribed by their religion and hence true for them. Reason was the idol of the Enlightenment thinkers, and through it they believed they could find truth without the aid of God. Postmodernism is a rejection of reason, knowledge, and truth. According to postmodernist philosophers, there is nothing out there called absolute truth. Man doesn't possess a faculty of knowledge called reason, he has no mind. He is just another irrational animal among other animals. They even rejected classical Aristotle's definition of man as the rational animal. There is no truth, denial of the existence of any absolute truth, or God who caused everything to exist. Man is not capable of knowing anything apart from his immediate experience. Postmodernism is the death of truth. Truth is just a social and cultural construct. Every culture constructs its truth, and whatever the followers of that culture believe to be true is truth for them, and no one has the right to refute their conclusion. Knowledge is a power builder. The philosophers of the Enlightenment used the so-called human reason to create power, and Western ideologies, and used it to control and subjugate non-Western countries. Those ideologies are behind white supremacy, the subjugation of females by their male counterparts, and enslavement and colonization of non-Western countries by the West. Therefore, the philosophers of postmodernism felt it was their task to deconstruct those false Western ideologies. They believe that they are the saviors of the weak and oppressed.